Hey, good morning, guys. So I've just been playing around this morning. It's obviously Saturday morning. It's nice and sunny, so just kind of sat in the garden and just kind of playing some ideas, right? So what I want to do is just go through something very quick, kind of in bar replay mode, right? So what I've done is I'm just going to put replay on. I'm going to click the random bar selection, right? And then if it gives me something that I can actually work with, like this, there we go. Then obviously we just start from there, right? So that's what I want to do first of all, right? I've got this random bar on. Now, if I was looking at this from a much higher time frame, right? So let's start with the daily view on this. And all we're going to do, right, is just forget kind of the big picture for now, right? Let's just look at this kind of locally, right? So we've had obviously these lows, which we can see we've moved up, we've moved down, right? So clearly the trend is starting to push itself up, right? Then we had this kind of major push up there, right? So what I'm doing is I'm not saying this is how I would trade. I'm just saying this is the kind of thing that I'm looking at myself. In terms of just kind of keeping the mind sharp, right? So what I want to look at is clear as day. I want to mark up some of the key areas, right? So we got this kind of consolidation cluster there, opposite kind of candles to the whole trend. We got a couple of gaps in there, right? We've obviously had the move that broke those highs, which comes back to this one, right? So for me, this one's pretty important overall, right? So if I was to look at this now, what I'm saying is I'm marking up, and a little bit like I did the other day with regards to showing how you make, folders for the object tree, right? I'm going to mark this one up as kind of one area. I'm going to put the gaps in. I'm going to put the closest gap rather than the furthest gap, right? Just because it's too close to this one for me, and I'm just going to end up with one big box overall. However, this comes back to the clustering technique, right? Then we have this one here, which ultimately broke that new high, right? So what I'm looking at right now is, given we've broken a high, we've broken a high, we've broken a high, right? We're going to have some kind of draw on liquidity, from this move up, right? We're going to have this move back. Now, what we're looking for is obviously moves back into the range, right? We also have some kind of little gap by the looks of it. I think that candle is there, so it's a very tiny gap, right? Literally on top of that box. So what I'm doing is I'm just saying to myself, right, forget everything else in terms of the big picture, right? This isn't exactly what I'm doing, to take a trade. This is just me looking for information on the character, right? And I'm just trying to kind of play the character. So if I was to have to, wanting to assume right now, right, we're going to have a line at least back to this top of the line there, right? Now we've got a couple of wicks to the upside, so that's kind of a good sign as well. In terms of a draw on liquidity, I'm expecting down, right? So I'm going to drop down a time frame, come into the 4 hour. Now, on the 4 hour time frame, what have I got there? What am I seeing? First things first, we've got a high, we drop, we come back, right? We fail to make a new high, right? And therefore we're moving down. We got a gap which is clearly just formed in there, right? So again, very similar to the move down on the daily, right? I'm just kind of assessing, I'm working, I'm trying to see what I've got there. Now, what I can do is I can put this one in here, for example, right? I'm going to make this a different color because it's a different time frame. So let's just say use this as green for now. And I've also got this little gap, right, which I don't really like because the gap is technically overlapping with this move there, right? So if we come back in there, you almost half expect it. So what I'm looking for right now, right, is a general idea. Now, what I could do is, again, similar thing with the object tree. I could put these into one particular group, and then I could put the second lot into the second group, and I can turn them on and off as I want. Okay. So what I'm going to do then is just come back to, say, a 1 hour time frame. Now, clearly, we've had a couple of decent moves down, right? We've got a gap, obviously, which overlaps that gap. So I could actually put this in there now and say, well, technically the gap is from this candle all the way there, right? Again, I don't really like it because it's massive, right? So what I'm going to do is just refine that. Although I got them, this is more for myself and talking to you guys, kind of freely with this, right? So what I'm looking for now is almost the logic and the rationale as to why we would likely move, down for one, right? So the daily draw for me is down, right? Then obviously we've had the change of character, which ultimately means it's this on these smaller time frames again, right? So we're going to look for a pull back into the range. Now, the next thing we've got is I could probably refine this a little bit more, because we've actually got this last candle, which was kind of the power play candle, right? So overall, right, I'm going to keep this there. I'm going to make this maybe blocked so we know that it's not really this one. But I just want to see the kind of reaction, right, if we get a reaction at all. Now, in terms of the downside, right, what we're going to look at there is we had these two red candles. So this was the last sell before you buy, breaking all those lows, right? So we're kind of in the zone already, kind of half expecting some kind of reaction, right? If we look at this and said, we might even sweep this a little bit lower, back up here, right? And my overall bias is something like this, right? So again, it's not a must. It's just, if I was looking at this from a very, very, very small point of view, right, without the indicators, without anything else, the way that I'm working it is no different to the rest of the mechanical structures. I'm just looking for reasons, right? Now, as I said, this is only, paper trading, if you will. The general idea here is not to say, hey, would you take every trade? It's to actually watch the character as and where we get to where we go, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this on, obviously, the 1 hour time frame. I'm going to move forward and say, right, do we get any kind of reaction? Do we get a sweep? No, we actually get a reaction, right? So that's kind of a good sign in terms of the move up. What I'd like to do is to see that clean through there, coming into that region there, right? Now, obviously, you've seen I put this on the random bar, right? This is just me talking to myself, right? This is the type of thing that I tend to do quite a lot. I don't mean just talking to myself, I mean in terms of obviously doing this type of analysis. So what I'm looking for is, now I'm looking for the type of reaction, right? Clearly we didn't have a sweep down, right? So in my notepad, all I'm saying is, right, the assumption was we could have had a sweep. We didn't, right? The move away wasn't really aggressive. However, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 green candles in a row, 1 hour time frame, 7 hours straight up. The consolidation was pretty much sideways, and the expansion was then straight through. We've come to the zone, to the candle that we've marked, right? Now, this particular candle, the small box inside of that, right? I don't need this one anymore because clearly that wasn't used. This one now, right, is something that I'm going to look at again, the same kind of thing. Would I potentially sweep this, right, to take these kinds of highs? So let's assume I was going to take a short position, right? Even if I say I'm going to take a short position from here. What I don't really want to do is put my stop loss too tight, right? Now, if I put a couple of examples of this, and I say, right, let's do again the same kind of entry, and I put my stop loss there, right? And then I'll move these down because obviously I want this to come down into that liquidity area, right? Normally I go a pip or two above, but this is just me showing you guys what I'm looking at. And then the third option is exactly the same type of trade, right? And obviously that then would actually give me a slightly higher stop loss. I might even come just above this candle, right, which is obviously an awful lot in terms of a stop loss. However, right, it still gives me probably a 2-to-1 type setup, right? So the general idea is that although I wouldn't really want to enter on just a kind of test like this, because this is a limit order type entry, right? What I'm looking for now is the smaller time frame change of character, right? And this is where the big difference comes in, where I think a lot of people tend to fail understanding, I'll just sell this now, and then ultimately what happens is the price, shoots back up, right, takes your stop losses out, and then carries on in the overall direction. So what I'm doing now is I'm just saying, right, I'm in an area that I like, right? I've marked that up. I can understand the story and the logic as to why I'm in the zone. We've got a bigger zone, which I don't really like. This is a little bit kind of dangerous, a little bit kind of iffy, maybe kind of playing with my psychology in terms of a stop loss. We clearly rejected from this zone, right? So I don't need that one anymore. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these ones on, right? And I'm going to drop into a smaller time frame, let's just say the 15-minute. Now, what I really want to see on this 15-minute, right, is this is where I can get a little bit more kind of snazzy. So we've had a rejection, right? We've pulled back. Now, in theory, we've just broken that structure there. So what I want to do is I want to see from that break of structure, I want to see the same concept on the 1 hour, right? I want to see these candles here hold, right? This is the kind of the general idea. So if now I was to refine that entry, and I'm going to say I'm going to come to the bottom of that candle there, right? This green candle, and I'm going to place my stop loss just above this one, right? So there's kind of entry number 1. I'm going to take my take profit down there, and that gives me a 6 R type setup, right? Second entry is going to be, maybe I'm going to come to the middle of the candle and I'm going to take my stop loss this time up to the top of this one, just a pip above, right? And that now, again, next kind of trade, right, is going to give me back to the same level, 1 pip above my orange box. That's a 4.5, right? Then the third one, the final one, I can now refine. I'm going to come to the center of this candle, right, or roughly the center there is close enough for me. I'm going to put my stop loss a couple of pips above the very high there, right, in case we do get some kind of wick. And this is actually going to give me a 2.6 type trade, right? So I'm going to see if this plays obviously into my favor. I might be completely wrong and it stops them all out, right? But this is the type of reason, and this is exactly, for why you need to do this type of back testing, right? So this is more not seeing what percentage trades you could make and what gains you'd obtain, but this is to understand the character, right? And the character for me, especially with Euro, is that you're looking for these types of sweeps, right? So you've got reason to come up here in terms of taking that liquidity. Now, I hope we don't, right? I hope obviously we come back. Now, the other thing is, we see this a lot, is we might just actually drop and not come back to any of these levels, right? Which clearly looks like this is what we're doing, right? However, the general bias is down, right? So what I'm looking at now from this particular point is these are all missed trades, right? This is one trade in theory, right? But it's a missed trade, right? Clearly we're going to come down, we come into my orange box, and we've done what we knew we were going to do from this high, right? So what we want to look at is if we were to take this as a setup, right, and to take these types of moves as a setup, let's just assume that we actually miss this particular entry there, right? We didn't get the pullback that we would have liked. We probably could have had an entry based on this break of structure here, right? Because obviously this was the change of character and the break of structure, knowing that we had the rejection on the 1 hour, right? So there was your first potential entry, right? If you were to look at that as one option. Right? Obviously, you could refine the stop losses as you want. We could have come up just above this, right? So don't feel that there's only one option, there's only one thing, right? I know a couple of you guys have said, oh, I've missed the entry or there's no pullback. You can drop down to a 3-minute, you can drop down to a 5-minute, you can drop down to a 1-minute, right? The general idea, and this is why I wanted to share this with you this morning, is that if you look at this in terms of a structure and a setup, right, the concepts, regardless of what time frame you're looking at, the concepts will almost always be the same, right? Now, let's get rid of these, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete all of these lines. I'm going to come in and I'm going to pick another random spot, right? So I'm going to exit the bar replay mode. I'm going to go back to the main chart. I'm going to come back to bar replay mode. I'm going to select a random bar, right? And this gives me, a new position. I don't even know what day that is. What day is that? So that's 18th November, 2016, right? So, right, again, similar kind of thing, right? What I want to do is I want to zoom right out. Let's just look at the daily. I'm not going to go and do this, kind of weekly, monthly at the moment. What I'm doing is I'm just looking at, well, what have we done, right? So first things first, we had this kind of ugly wick, right? That ugly wick probably swept the liquidity over there. And this is just me building up my story, right? You can see how quick I can do this. And I'm going to try to do this a little bit quicker, as if I'm talking to myself rather than to you guys, right? So what I'm then looking for is the next thing. We had the very last buy before you sell, right? So that one, I'm going to put this back to the line. That one is a pretty clear area for me. We had a sweep on liquidity up over here, right? We then come down and we break that structure. So we point into the downside. We also leave a couple of footprints in terms of a gap there, right? So there's your first gap. There's actually a little gap hidden in there, right? So this one's a little bit kind of sneaky. If obviously you're looking for them, right? This one's a little bit sneaky in there, right? And it's very, very slight, but there is actually a gap in there, right? So they are the two kind of areas. These are the two things I'm looking for. Now, there's another one down here, right? This gap here. Now, obviously, this was the point of making this tool, right? We've probably got a couple of things that we can see in there. Two gaps in there, like I've missed the one. So, what I'm looking at is, although these are relatively close, right? The only thing that might happen there is the low here. We might overlap. So we could see a pullback to that gap, right? So that's going to be an interesting area. We've left the range, right? So we've left the range on a daily time frame. Now, Obviously, we're expecting a pullback at some stage. We're not going to keep on going down forever. First thing I want to do is just look across to the left and say to myself, right, what do we have here? Well, we had this last candle, right? This was clearly a massive institutional type push. With that being said, I'm going to come to the last red candle, right? And I'm going to put just a little box in that last red candle. That's close enough for me for this example, right? Probably come a little bit closer there, right? There we go. Happy with that. Now, as long as we don't break that, right, and break that with conviction, clearly after the pullback, we're not very likely to break that and keep going down, right? Unless you see something like, a tsunami or whatever, and a natural disaster that changes the whole dynamics of the chart, right? You're very unlikely to see. So what I want to see, right, is some kind of push away. Now I'm going to keep this on the daily for now, right, because I'm not really too concerned. We've had some kind of push, but it's not really a colossal push, right? So this is again where you wouldn't be jumping on a chart and saying, right, I'm trading this. You want to be doing this 2, 3, 4 days, kind of prior to when you're looking for your type of entries, right? So, for example, we're now failing at these levels, right? But we're not failing enough to say, hey, we're done and we're over with. This could be good enough for a pullback to keep on going, right? So what happens now is we've kind of sat within the range. We kind of failed the range. We are testing the underside. I'm going to see if there's any kind of sweep level underneath here, right? We haven't touched that yet. So with that being said, what I want to do now is drop down a time frame, right? Dropping down a time frame, I can see we've done a couple of things on this time frame. My biggest reason is probably up at this stage. We've had loads of move down. The only reason that I don't like to take this up at the moment is the last move up that we saw obviously was doing this, right? So this was like a nothingness rejection from the zone, right? We haven't really had a power rejection from the zone, which means the sellers are not really interested yet, right? Which means we're more likely to get some kind of sweep, right? So we're still at that level. We haven't really rejected. We just tapped the lows. We haven't really swept. We haven't really rejected, right? So at this particular point, this is like a nothingness grand scheme of things. However, what we've now done, we've changed the character on this smaller time frame. Right? This allows me to go back up a time frame. So I'm going to come to this, right? And I'm going to say, well, again, similar kind of thing. We've had a rejection, but we're seeing a wick, right? This isn't really sexy for me. This is a type of trade that I want to stay out of until I get some more confirmation, right? Now, this is where it gets a little bit more exciting, right? We're now starting to see these kinds of rejections on this 4-hour time frame. We kind of touched down here, right? So, it's kind of good enough, but not really. I'm still a little bit wary about this. I don't really need my zone anymore. Clearly, we took some liquidity underneath that, right? Key levels obviously still up here intact on the daily time frame. So what I'm looking for now is almost reason and logic as to why I want to take this long, right? So we've just broken these highs, right? So this is kind of step one. However, we've also failed to clear and smash through these types of highs, right? So the chances are we might be seeing a sweep of that to come down for us to obviously carry on back up, right? Now, that's kind of number one, right? And this is kind of, again, the character trait. This is the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Where would I want to see price hold if we were to come down and reject? I'd like to see this. This is a really, really cool area. This one has obviously driven the last change of character / break of structure. So that's kind of the option number one, right? In terms of what I'd like to see. What I'm going to do now is drop down to a smaller time frame again, 1 hour. I'm going to look at this and I could probably refine this and say, well, there's the last, there's the last green candle there. Sorry, red candle. There's my last red candle, right? Before obviously we break these structures again, right? So the only thing I don't like at the moment on this time frame is we're not seeing much of a power play through, and therefore I'd like to see a move back down. We're starting to see that move back down, right? That bar didn't hold, right? Which means ultimately the next general idea for me is potentially a kind of a sweep, right? That would be the optimal for a much larger move up, right? We probably won't get either of these now. But look, the general idea is, right, we're still not seeing a sweep. We're still not seeing a power play. Yeah, this is back to the 1 hour. However, we've just changed the character again, right? So what we've now done is we've come up, we've come down, right? We've come up, we've come down, and we've now started a new uptrend, right? Because we've had kind of the pull back, the move up, and the push back down, right? So at this time, and on this time frame, what I want to do is get rid of these. Oh, I can't get rid of all of them. Let's get rid of all of them. Right. So on this particular time frame, I now have two options, right? Well, three options. I could probably drop down a time frame again, right? But for the sake of just talking you guys through what I'm thinking, how I'm thinking, right? What I want to do now is I want to look at these highs. This cluster clearly didn't take new lows, right? We didn't breach those lows, right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to see this cluster, right? This kind of master pattern type consolidation. I'd like to see that broken, right? Before I look at anything long, right? If we reject from it, I'm still thinking we get some kind of sweep, right? We're still breaking down, we're still breaking down, we're still breaking down, right? So my mindset at the moment is, look, we've just made another fresh low, right? We've failed. So in theory, all I'm seeing right now in my mind is we've got this move here, we've got this move there, and we got this move there, right? So we're currently in a pullback phase again. Similar kind of story, right? Across to the left. I want to see that break, right? Because this is going to break before this breaks, right? And there's my ultimate long. So at this particular point, all I'm doing, and now imagine, I'm looking at this in kind of, say, a live time, right? All I'm looking at from a back testing point is to say, if I was to play this again, if this happened today, how would I play this, right? Why would I play this particular way? Why haven't I put, 15 trades on at the moment, right? And this is the beauty of letting the trades come to you, right? So what I'm doing now is I'm still playing right now. We've started to make signs of a little bit of strength through there, right? So now we've got signs of a bit of strength. What I really want to do is I want to understand what am I seeing on both sets of time frames. So general idea is if we've got our bigger daily bias up, we're starting to see signs of strength on this 1 hour. What are we seeing on a 4 hour? Well, on the 4 hour, we're seeing almost the same type of character, but we've had this up, we've had this down, we've had this up. We've then come down and up and down and up, and we've been busy going pretty much nowhere, right? So next thing is, do we get some kind of break or do we get an absolute rejection, right? Absolute rejection at the moment. So for me, this is where you literally just sit on your hands, right? There's nothing on, there's nothing to see, there's nothing interesting because we haven't done what we've expected this to do, right? And what we want this to do, right? So as infuriating as this can be, what I really want to see is that. Okay, now we've seen a clear run to liquidity and we've seen almost an instantaneous rejection, right? So all of these things can come, this can come back to my key level there, right? And now we've had this kind of instant rejection from liquidity. I can drop down a time frame. What I want to look for now is, again, similar thing. I want to look for a change of character. So this is one level, this is my next level, right? Now this is where, if you want to come down to a 5 minute, you can actually take some trades, right, that ultimately look like this, right? If you get now a rejection from there, you could literally have a stop loss on there. You could take a handful of pips like this, right? And ultimately, you can be quite aggressive in a move. Because once you break this level, you're going to get some fuel, right? You're going to get some move. So this is the type of move that obviously I do take time to time. And I take these based on the fact that I've already made profit for my week or my month, or how I feel when I'm sat in front of the computer. So with that being said, what we're looking for now is a move up. If we don't get a move up, right, we're still part of that bigger sweep, right? So there's the move up and through, there's your change of character. We've changed the character on the 1 hour, but we've still failed to change that on a 4 hour, right? Now what we have is an opportunity to say, we have this gap that has just formed sitting in there to there, okay? We could look at that as a potential option. So again, similar kind of thing. If I was to take a long position there, I'd love to see the price come back in. Probably going to put my stop loss just under these pips here, right? And then ultimately, I got this one as kind of target 1, this one as target 2, this one as target 3, right? And we could obviously play that. So let's just say we put that all the way up there for now, right? Now, if we were to get a pull back to this region, right? Now I'm interested on the 4 hour. Right? Now the only issue being from the 4 hour to the 1 hour is I've actually got a different set of rules and criteria from this entry point, right? So we now have another gap sitting just in there. I can't make that. There we go. Right? So we now have another gap sitting in there. So this gives me another option for a trade. The only problem being is for me probably a comparable stop loss, right? Similar kind of move up. It's still a 3.5, 4%. Yeah, nearly 4% trade, right? But this is just me explaining to you, why I'm seeing what I'm seeing, right? So hopefully we come back to the lower entry, right? And we don't just run all the way up. But obviously we know that the draw for liquidity is to the upside, right? So it wouldn't be a surprise. But this is the type of reason again, right? That, like I said to you in the last example, if you miss these entries and these opportunities, right, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to get you in at a later date, right? So let's get rid of this one. That one's not interesting anymore. This one is now interesting. All right. Same kind of levels apply. The only difference being is we've already tagged this one, right? So it probably is more likely I want this one, right? I want to now, test and retest what we've got on the bigger time frame. That for me is probably, there's your move up, right? There's your pullback, there's a move up. This pullback comes, it does kind of change the character. So if I was to take this one, which I'm not saying I am and I would, right? If I was to take this one for the sake of the example, I'd be a little bit wary, at least moving my stop losses. If we were to come down, ping my entry and go, right? And again, I'm not going to use confirmation. This is just more to show you the example, right? If we get in at all, right? Right. Let's just assume that we get in there, right? And again, I wouldn't really want to be in there. It's still in a downtrend. I still want the confirmation. Let's just assume that we did, right? And, forget this right now in terms of stop loss. Let's assume that we still want this move up, right? We're going to sweep liquidity probably the second time. Right. Now we start hopefully to move up. Right? As we start to move up, like I said to you just now, right, the general idea on this move up is, if we get up at all, is once we start hitting this level, right, and this region, this is why this becomes important for your back testing, right? Once we start hitting this level, I would want to be moving the stop losses, right, like this, in terms of, say, an entry back down where we were, up down there, the entry back down there, like this, right? I'd be wanting to move the stop losses, up to kind of follow this relatively closely, right? Because as soon as we start breaking that, this is the type of thing that's going to happen. This is where the bigger sweeps and the bigger time frames come in, right? So showing you guys the examples on this, and this is why I said, I don't want to take this type of trade. You're looking for it. I'm giving you the examples, and I'm talking to myself doing this, right? I'm giving myself the examples as to why would this trade work out? Why wouldn't it work out, right? I'm not just saying, hey, there's a trade. Look, I failed this one. This is no good. I'm asking myself, why? What's going on the smaller time frame? What's going on a bigger time frame? Well, as we started to see this move up, right? The reason that I've kept this one on is in an ideal world, we would have, gone up here and come straight back down before taking this out, right? So in my notebook, what I'm doing is I'm saying price has gone too far away from my entry. Take the trade off the table, right? Sentiment has changed. My feelings towards the trade has changed. Everything has changed in terms of the dynamic, right? I'm happy to play these through in terms of a paper account, because you can look and say, well, actually, if I'd kept this on, this is the outcome. The outcome for me was a negative outcome here, right? So these are the types of things that I'm looking for, over and over and over again, right? Now, let me see what time we've got on this. Yeah, actually, I'm going to give another really quick example, right? So I'm going to do the next one, hopefully even quicker again. This was a very ugly one overall. Let me just find another one on the random replay and get rid of all these drawings. Can you just do a random replay again for me? Yes, you can. Okay. So this particular date, this is 2014. Right, I'm going to come back out to the daily. I'm going to look at a similar kind of, idea. What have we seen? Well, this high was taken there, which obviously then rejected. So that's kind of a sweep there. This one comes across and this gives us a double sweep. So we kind of have relatively equal highs, right, in this kind of zone. We took out a low there. We haven't taken out this low, which means it's probably still the external low. We're obviously seeing this right now. So my general bias at this point is probably we've had a sweep followed by a sweep, which means this is likely some kind of UTAD, and therefore my expectations would probably be down, very quick bias, right? So that being said, what am I looking for in terms of down moves? Well, clearly this one broke some kind of structure. Clearly this one broke some kind of structure. The structure was really, really shitty there. So this one is probably the key candle for me, right, in that sense. Key candle there. Now what I'm looking for is obviously a continuation on down. This is probably the first kind of target area. We probably have this as well, right? This one's quite a nice little zone. So what I'd like to see is ultimately something that looks like this, is a pushback up into the range, pushback down to there somewhere, right? Now, smaller time frame, and you can see, guys, right, as you get into this, you'll start to understand, you'll be able to do the same kind of analysis, right, that I'm looking at, kind of over and over again. The reason that this one was obviously important, right, was we broke the structure. Well, technically now on a smaller time frame, I can refine it. There's the one that broke the structure. So the last candle that broke the structure is this one, right? Then we come back down and we have a new structure low. So the next one down is this candle, right? So we're going to go back to the same kind of structure, right? So we got one still open and one just tapped, right? Which means that one now has broken the structure again. We have this low here. Now what we've done this time is we've obviously changed the character, technically to the upside, and then we instantly come down and take out the lows. We've changed the character, which means smaller time frame, I might be looking for something that sweeps these lows, comes up potentially here now and down rather than there, right? But again, I'm not going to trade this, right? This is the general idea in terms of just getting part of the story correct, right? So general idea would be we could stick, a long position there should we get it, right? Now this could be option number one if you wanted to trade it, right? Don't like this one. Option number two could ultimately be we get some kind of move there. I'm going to come just above those highs and I want to take out, new lows. Option number three is ultimately we have another short position. We do get all the way up there, right? We can put our stop loss just above these little highs, and then we obviously target again kind of new lows, could make that a bit bigger, right? Potentially even down further. I could keep all of them open, right, to the downside. So they're the types of things that I'm looking for as to why would they play, what would they play, where would they go. I'm going to keep this on a 4 hour just to make this very quick to finish off this video, right? So general idea is we didn't get a full sweep. We get an instant move up. We get some kind of reaction from the zone. What I'd be looking for now is smaller time frame type entry, right? So that one probably could have worked if you put it right at the level rather than the sweep. This one obviously has given me a nice little rejection from the zone, so I kind of like the zone at the moment, right? So it's probably this one that's on rather than this one kind of at the moment, right? In terms of where I'm assessing. What I'd like to do now is drop down the time frame, right? Come into this smaller time frame and say, right, well, we've had the rejections, very similar kind of situation. What do we see there? We've had the drop, we've had the retest, which means, it probably could have been entries on that smaller time frame. I'd like to see a retest back into the zone. We got a little gap sitting in that zone just there, right? So if I was to take a new position, new entry, I'm going to look for a short position. I'd love to see this push back up into my range. I'm going to keep my stop loss just above these highs, and I'm going to take this as a target one, and then obviously kind of, ride the trade should we get some kind of entry, right? So there's our kind of entry position. If we were to spike in like this, again, that would change how I would view this, probably 15-minute, 5-minute time frame with a view of what have we got going on, right? This particular move I'm probably happy with in terms of it went down to come up. We've tagged an area of interest, right? We're kind of in this trade, but not in that trade, right? If we were to say limit orders, no confirmation. Then obviously what I'd like to see now is an absolute drop. We don't get it. We spike up, right? And now we probably continue on down to, target area. So again, where I'd be looking at in terms of the notes, right, is why am I getting these types of spikes, right? And the answers for this question is going to be on the higher time frames. All we've had, right, is a push down. We've had no run on liquidity to the upside, right, because we didn't take the upside there. We've had the run on liquidity there. This is probably a news candle looking at this type of move straight down, straight up, right? But you can kind of get the general idea, right? Is that obviously Stop losses would be one thing I'd look at on this kind of time frame, right? And again, I haven't gone into stop losses. I've just literally gone, let me show you one above, one below. Um, in terms of the character, right, the sweep, the double sweep, the triple sweep in some instances, but the general bias, right, is going to be doing what you expect it to do, right? You can kind of see that it was, down, up, back, down, the sweep. So in my notes, and this is why I wanted to show you this morning, in my notes and your notes, what you want to be doing is assessing the pairs and the instruments that you trade in exactly this way, right? So anyway, I hope you enjoy this one, guys. Right, this one's again a little bit different to what I normally do. I'm just going to kind of keep playing around with this and just kind of keep making notes, really. So anyway, hope you enjoyed. See you on the next one. Enjoy your weekend, all. Bye.